Good morning, friends. My name is Steve Tamayo. I am the cultural specialist for the NICE program, the Native Indigenous Center of Education for OPS School District. And so I'm going to explain one of our bustles. Bustles are an arrangement of feathers that is worn to explain very specific warrior societies or very specific tribal nations. And so there are many different types of bustles that exist. And so we have warrior society bustles, but we also have dance society bustles, and I'll explain that one after this. And so this bustle I'm going to explain is actually a Lakota bustle. Lakota is the dialect in which I speak, and so if you look at South Dakota, you cut it in half. Everybody on the left side of the Missouri River are the Lakota people. And so in our bustles, we talk very specifically about societies. And so with this, we're talking about a warrior society. A warrior to us is the Akichita. The society is Okolakichiae. And so when we talk very specific about the Lakota Kichita Okolakichiae, we are talking about our Lakota warrior societies itself. And we actually have 19 different warrior societies. Every single one of our societies has very specific headdresses, has very specific paraphernalia that coexists with each society. And it could be as simple as a rattle or a bandolier made out of dew claws, or it could be an otter hide. But all these items, paraphernalia, once again, will distinguish what society that individual comes from. Sometimes we wear that kit fox. We call that tokala. Tokalas are the kit fox because they live in the underworld and they live on the earth's surface. And that gives them a more special power than just our beings that roam the earth. And so once again, you know, when we identify our bustles, when we talk about our bustles, it's always about a warrior society. The first one was just a belt. On this belt, we just hung feathers. But each one of these feathers was painted very specific. And so, is this one red? And then black? And the difference is we spilt blood on the battlefield. When we came home, we were gifted with this feather because we spilt the blood of the enemy on that battlefield. But if we took their life, the feather that we received when we got home turned into that black feather because of that mourning process. And so not only did we mourn, we knew that that family was going to mourn because of the loss of their warrior, their provider, their hunter. And so not only did we bring this hardship on that individual, but their families as well as their villages. And so to take somebody's life was only done in revenge or if we absolutely had to. And so most times we just had a really long stick, very pointy. And so we call this process counting coup. And of course, we translate this in Lakota at home. But in English, counting coup is to touch the enemy with this stick. And so if you ever go to a powwow and you see a dancer out there just with a really long stick, or even a dance stick, sometimes with the eagle talon on, that's what that stick is for. It's to count coup in their enemy. And so these are the 5 grades of counting coup. And so we would have feathers that we would alter. The first feather means that this is the first grade. 2nd, 3rd, 4th, and 5th grade. What we do is, remember, this quill goes all the way up. And so we would get this feather and cut straight down on both sides of that quill, removing the barbs, and our feather would look like this. And then we would attach horsehair We call this tough, horsehair tough. This means that this individual who is gifted this, when we made our way back to the village, they would have ceremony for us. And so this is how songs were created back in the day, because we all have very specific names, spirit names. And so we don't put those out there. Only when we accomplish something in life. And so when we would come home, we would talk to these singers. And so I couldn't tell about myself because that's bragging. And we never brag about ourselves. And so somebody else had to be my witness and would come up to these singers, and this is what happened. And so in doing so, this is how our songs are created. So through interpretation of dance, we are reenacting what had taken place outside of the village. And so when we got home, once again, first thing we would have to do is go through a ceremony we call inikagapi, which is a sweat lodge, to cleanse, to purify us. And so then we were allowed to be amongst the innocents. And those are the little kids. Those are the women, the old people. So we had to cleanse ourselves first of all. And then of course we would have a feast. We would rejoice that we made it back home. And so my family would sponsor meals for the village. And so in doing so, these songs were sung, dances were created. And so the leaders of our villages would stand up and put everything to a halt, and then gift me with these feathers. And so every single one of our feathers for indigenous people were gifted to us for a very specific reason and purpose. And so once again, this is the first grade. It means that I was the first one into that camp to touch that enemy. And then here comes my kola. My kola back in the day was my partner in crime. And so I depended on him. And so me and him were each other's witnesses. And so maybe he would come in second and touch the same person. And so we could count coup 5 times on one individual. These are the first, second, third, fourth, fifth grade. The second grade is we would get this feather and cut it right here, sideways. That would automatically remove that whole part. And so this is the front of the feather. This is the proper rite. The third person to come in would come in, and we would cut this side of the feather. And it would look like that. The fourth person we would cut in like this. And it would look all zigzagged. So here's an example of that. We would have a feather. We would cut it on this side, and that would be removed. The third grade, we would cut on the opposite side, and it looked like that. The fourth grade, once again, we kept cutting in towards the middle. And then pull. And our feather looked like this. In the fifth grade, we would actually get this part and pull straight down. And it would look like a flower. And so this feather right here, we would leave this top part intact, pull this down, and it would look like a flower. So these are the 5 grades of Lakotas. And so there are other feathers. This is just counting coup. And so once again, we kept this philosophy, this thought process, we kept it intact. But the difference between this feather and these feathers is these are all down. because it's a tally. And that's very important. These are straight up. So when you look at archival photos, you'll see our leaders with their feathers straight up, because it explains this process. And so once again, we kept a tally. And so part of this goes with this. And so sometimes we would have a tally of lives that we took. If this was red, we could put dots on our feathers, because each dot represents an individual whose blood we spilt during war. And so this is a way for us to keep track, a tally of what occurred outside. And so this is our writing system. And so from this, we would actually create a bustle for the Lakotas. And so our bustles look like this, because this is just what they call Mi Gana Ka. Mi Gana Ka Wiyaka. Is the feathers. And so this is a belt, a sash that we would wear. Once again, this is a tally of blood that was spilled or lives that were taken. And so that's how important that is. And so once we earned all these feathers, we would just keep them, because this is a tally, once again, of our life's work in war and in raids. And so in doing so, after we obtained a whole bunch of feathers, then we would get that feather and tie that buckskin, once again, that loop on the bottom of that feather, and then have a string that goes through connecting all of them. And so these are all feathers. But they're all notched. They're all cut. It's a collection, once again. And so however many feathers, those would be placed inside of this bustle. And so they become very pointy. And so in my language, Kichila, Kagapi is a collection of feathers. Kichila means it looks like a cactus. And so when I'm done with this bustle, if you go outside and you see the cactus that are sticking straight up, because they're really narrow at the bottom and they spread out, that's what that means. Kichila means that it's spreading out, looks like a cactus. Kagapi, remember when I explained the Umaha bustle, the kage is this. It's very similar. They say kage, we say kaga. This is the crow. This is black feathers. And so when we incorporate black feathers, we're telling of death. And so that's how important that is. So when you are able to read the Lakota language, you can run this cross comparison of this as well as the Umaha, because the commonality here is that crow feather. Not specifically the crow, because it could be raven, but it's that black feather that we're talking about, which represents death. And so this is a Lakota bustle. Same thing. We have our spikes coming up, the arrows that are in the body. Same concept. We still have the trailer and the feathers coming down. And so I believe that this was adopted by Umahas. This is ours. Umahas, they don't cut up and notch their feathers like that. And so that's the difference there. But when they made this Omaha dance, that Helushka, that they call it Hidewachi. And so once again, in my language, this is Omaha, Hidewachi. So the full moon in August is when they celebrate this. This is their homecoming. And so for us, we say ha, he, bi, wa, chi. It's the full moon. This is when they have their dance. That's what hede wa chi means in the Umaha language. As Lakota, ha, he, bi, wa, chi. It's that full moon that we celebrate. And so theirs is usually the same time. It's usually the same time. It's the third weekend in August. It's the fall time. It's that transition into that next season. And so, once again, this is the similarity of language, of the moon and the dance and the crow, and how does this all correlate? So it's kind of cool that I understand all of this, that I can make sense to help my students. And so once again, unkichila, unkagapi, miyaganaka, because of the belt, and that's the sash that we wear. So this is the difference between an Omaha bustle and a Lakota bustle, because we incorporate our counting coup system. Thank you.